It's only if it's March where everyone is talking about Women's Day and women artists and women of indie being on the cover.
Women's Day can either be a great opportunity or just absolute tokenism. I have absolutely no qualms about you want to pay me today because I'm a woman from the industry. Give me money. I'm happy to talk and say whatever. And that's what happens. You're like, oh, you're a woman in this industry. Tell us about your plight.
Media has to sort of be able to understand that this is not something that you're trying to sell. These are issues that you need to talk about throughout the year.
That's cool that people want to do things for women. I'm honestly happy when I get the odd few extra gigs a month in March because as an artist, I'm not going to say no to a gig or get on a high horse because of it. It's fine. If you're celebrating women at some point, you're having an opportunity to talk about women and stuff for a while, that's fine. But yeah, the tokenism does make you feel a little icky, but I think I'm past it. The bigger problem is when you have say festivals and you're on the bill because you're a woman.
Even if you look at numbers from 2 or 3 years ago of the percentage of women that play music festivals, it's hardly between 5 to 15%, dude. What is that even?
I also think that to survive in this industry, you kind of have to fit these conventions that most queer people just don't. So we just end up getting booked to queer festivals and stuff like that.
Often the decision isn't taken to see whether equality or inclusivity is in the picture, but I think as much as possible, people try to include wherever they can. I wouldn't just be able to program women because there are a lot of women. Thinking about it, it depends on what kind of festival it is, where it is. Is it right to put this kind of sound here?
Also, because gatekeeping is being done by these cis-het men, they're not the most welcoming to anything that's kind of different from these conventions. So say it's this just lesbian with short hair, they just won't get it. They won't program her, they program someone that they know who's more conventionally whatever.
The scene is no longer how it was. So even after so many years, if you're still sort of struggling to figure out who the women in the scene are, it's quite ridiculous.
There is this grand list that was created, an Excel sheet of all the women artists that exist. It's so funny that a list had to be created because none of us women knew who were the other women in the scene. But the men needed to know, so they made a list.
There are labels who don't have a women on their label. Which label has a women rapper? Tell me, there is no fucking label.
I see a lot less women, whether it's programming artists or whether it's them being signed to record labels. They're all guys. It's a fucking sausage fest. Sausage fest max. I don't know why there's that disparity.
Because there are men in power who are putting these gigs out there. They don't imagine or have the women circle to even tell them to get a fucking women on board.
And this is in 2020, 2021, where your friend, your contemporary who is in your age group, a boy cannot recognize simple things as what is the gender diversity in this company?
They don't even want to think about these things, right? Which is why it doesn't figure in their processes and in their event organization. So
there's a growing sort of, representation of women in this space. But the way that we are being represented is still being umbrellaed by what men sort of...
They don't understand it. It's we want to do this queer party, but we're going to have the programming done by straight people and we're going to book straight artists. And it's what sense does that make?
Women in music panel, which was garbage 10 years ago and it's still garbage.
More often than not, even at music conferences, there is that one woman and the rest of it is filled with men. So it's not a panel. Mostly they're just men and, they're discussing industry things, they're discussing the future and trends and all of that. And it's all men, it's a panel.
It's also who's moderating the conversation. So a lot of the time, in the indie music scene, there are a handful of us that are actually the people moderating it.
Why is it that organizers of these conferences don't think of these things as well? Why is it that women don't have a say in any of this?
What's the point? It's not anything is particularly changed.
It's because it's men in these positions of power, whether it's the head of a label, whether it's the head of an event management organization. So in this case, if it's a head of a label, that guy needs to decide that, hey, there's another woman here. I mean, she might not be at my level, but let her represent this label. Maybe talk about how women need to be perceived in the scene.
And also the subject matter of what you're discussing, right? If you're talking about business, if you're talking about tech, if you're talking about artist management, it's not like there are no women who do this stuff. Bring them in, talk about them. If you're calling me for a panel, call us for our expertise and not because our virtue of being a woman. It's not that representation doesn't exist. It is kind of there and it's being created, but it's just not being done in the way that is actually facilitating for women.
Media editors need to take that call and find reasons to tell important stories about women and queer people, not just because it's the Pride Month and there's a Pride March happening.
I think what's so important is that queer people and women get to kind of make their own decisions.
There are challenges throughout the year. There are issues throughout the year. There are things that need to be talked about every other day.